We don't want old-timers in this company anymore. The ice-cold voice of my daughter-in-law, the new CEO, echoed through the conference room, pinning me like a dagger. My name is Judith Albright, a 72-year-old widow from Chicago, and I thought I'd seen it all in this life. Until that day. Stick with me through this story to see what an outdated woman can do when she's pushed into a corner. And don't forget to drop me a line and let me know what city you're listening in from. My late husband, Arthur, used to say that every bolt of fabric holds a story. How the thread was spun, how the color was dyed, where the pattern came from. It all tells a journey. Our company, Albright & Son Textiles, well, that was our life story. I spent more than 40 years of my life there, helping Arthur turn a tiny workshop on the outskirts of Chicago into a respected name in the industry. I had thought that at 72, the final chapter of my story would be one of peaceful pages, watching my only son, Michael, write even more glorious chapters. But I was wrong. The best stories, or the worst, they often don't arrive quietly. They hit you like a hurricane. My office at Albright & Son hadn't changed much in 20 years. It was like an oasis of memory in the middle of the modern stream my daughter-in-law Vanessa was trying to create. My desk was made of walnut, its surface etched with the faint scratches of time. Each one a major contract, a sleepless night, a tough decision. On the wall hung black and white photos of Arthur and me, two young faces with smiles full of ambition, standing in front of our first workshop. Beside them were samples of classic fabrics I had designed myself, their colors and softness still defying time. I'd often run my hand over the worn wood, feeling the warmth of the past, of those hard days filled with love and hope. That was my world, a world built on things that were tangible, lasting, a world completely opposite to the cold charts and hollow buzzwords on Vanessa's computer screen. The storm began quietly in the boardroom on a Tuesday morning. This room was one of Vanessa's first changes when she became CEO 6 months ago, a change my son, Michael, fully supported. It was cold and impersonal, with glass walls and a long, gleaming metal conference table, the only place in the building where I felt like a stranger. Vanessa stood at the head of the table, perfect in a power navy suit, her blonde hair in a neat bun. She was a beautiful and charming woman, I had to admit. That look, along with the prestigious MBA and promises of a groundbreaking future, had completely won over my son. Today, she was presenting a plan she called Vision Restructuring. Slick words danced on the projection screen: asset optimization, brand repositioning, technological breakthrough. And then, the first knife came out, sweet and deadly. The first and most crucial step, Vanessa said, her clear voice echoing in the room, is to divest from our underperforming assets, specifically selling the North Carolina textile mill. The air in the room thickened. The North Carolina mill wasn't just an asset. The North Carolina mill wasn't just an asset. It was our foundation, the place where Arthur and I had shed our first drops of sweat. The place that produced the famous linen that made the Albright & Son name. I spoke up. My voice may have trembled a bit, but it was steady. Vanessa, that is not an underperforming asset. That's our backbone. Selling it would be like shooting ourselves in the foot. Vanessa turned to me, a professional but cold smile on her lips. Judith, I have the utmost respect for what you and Mr. Arthur built, but we can't live in the past. Profits from that mill have been stagnant for 3 years. By selling it, we'll have a huge amount of capital to invest in the future. What future? I asked, feeling a hot rush in my veins. A future in something called the Ethelred Textile Technology Fund? A name no one in this industry has ever heard of? We're going to sell our soul to buy an empty promise? I looked over at Michael, my son, who sat at the opposite end of the table from Vanessa. He was staring at the documents in front of him, avoiding my eyes. My heart clenched. His silence hurt more than 1,000 words. Mom, he finally said, his voice flat. We've been over this. We need to change. Vanessa has done her research. This is our chance to get ahead. I looked around the table.
Familiar faces, people who had been with me through thick and thin, now looked down or away. I knew I was isolated. The storm was no longer brewing, it had surfaced. The vote was just a formality. The plan was approved. I felt the chill of the metal chair I was sitting on, the chill of indifference and betrayal. I thought that was the worst of it for the day. But once again, I was wrong. At 3 in the afternoon, an urgent email was sent to all employees, summoning everyone to the main hall. I had a bad feeling. I saw Vanessa and Michael standing on a raised platform, Michael's face tense and emotionless.
Vanessa began her speech with hollow praises about the company's history, about the dedication of the previous generation. Then she pivoted. But to move forward, she said, her voice now sharp as a razor, we must have the courage to shed the burdens of the past. We cannot let outdated mindsets hold back the Albright & Sons ship. She paused for a second to let her words sink in. Then she turned and looked directly at me, standing among the crowd of employees. For that reason, on behalf of the board, I am announcing that we will be saying goodbye to Mrs. Judith Albright. Her role as honorary chairwoman and all her advisory duties at the company will terminate effective today. We are deeply grateful for her past contributions and wish her a peaceful retirement. A dead silence fell over the room. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, filled with shock, pity, and even fear. I saw Sarah, the head accountant who'd worked with me for 30 years, cover her mouth with her hand. I saw Tom, the workshop foreman I had helped when his son was sick, stare at the floor. And I saw Michael, my son, the boy I raised alone after Arthur passed, looking away, staring at some empty space on the wall. A sharp pain shot through my heart, but right after it, a strange sense of calm washed over me, like the eye of a hurricane where everything is eerily still right before the real fury hits. I understood then. This wasn't a business decision. This was a purge. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I held my head high, walked out of the crowd, and headed toward my old desk in the corner of the office, which I had kept as a memento. People parted to let me pass as if I were a ghost. I slowly gathered my few personal items. The family photo of Michael at his college graduation, his bright smile next to mine. The marble paperweight Arthur had given me on our first wedding anniversary at the company. I placed them in my handbag. Every move I made was slow, deliberate. Then I turned around. I walked straight towards the platform where Vanessa was still standing, her face showing a mix of triumph and a little confusion at my silence. I stopped right in front of her. I looked deep into my daughter-in-law's cold blue eyes. I smiled, a genuine but mysterious smile. "Good luck, Vanessa," I said, my voice soft but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. With that, I turned and walked away, without a single glance back. I heard whispers rise behind me, but I didn't care. As I walked through the large glass doors of Albright & Son, the place I had called home for 40 years, I didn't feel like a loser. The hurricane had officially made landfall. And when you've spent your life weaving the strongest fabrics, you know you won't be easily blown away. My smile wasn't one of acceptance. It was a declaration of war. And my fight? It had just begun. The silence in my Oak Park home that night was heavier than any scream. I didn't cry. Tears are for loss, and I hadn't lost anything yet. I was just being challenged. When Arthur passed away, I learned to turn grief into strength, and now I turned humiliation into purpose. My home office, which was once just for reading and answering a few personal emails, suddenly became a command center. I started with the one weapon Vanessa could never have, 40 years of relationships and trust. My address book wasn't just numbers. It was names, people, stories. My first call was to Frank Miller, our retired head of textile industry analysis, a man whose mind was sharper than any software. "Frank, it's Judith," I said, my voice as calm as if I were just catching up. "Long time no see.
How have you been? How are the grandkids? We chatted for a few minutes about family, about the aches and pains of getting older. Then I casually shifted gears. You know, Frank, I've had some time on my hands, been doing a little reading. Have you ever heard of an investment fund called Ethelred? That's right, Aethelre. Sounds a bit Anglo-Saxon, doesn't it? There was a pause on the other end. I heard the rustling of papers. You know, Judith, Frank said, a hint of caution in his voice, the name doesn't ring a bell, but it reminds me of a few small acquisitions lately. 2 synthetic fiber suppliers in Georgia and a dyeing plant in Tennessee. They were all bought up by some anonymous parent company. Let me check on that for you. While I waited, I pulled out a large whiteboard Michael had bought me for my gardening notes. Now it was my battle map. I wrote Albright and Son in the center. A few hours later, Frank called back. Just as I thought, Judith. The parent company for all 3 of those acquisitions is registered in Delaware, and it's linked to a few directors from the Ethelred Fund. Looks like someone is quietly scooping things up. I thanked Frank and hung up. A chill ran down my spine. I drew 3 arrows pointing to Albright and Son, labeling them with the names of the 3 acquired suppliers. Vanessa wasn't just selling our mill. She was letting a shark quietly circle its prey. Her plan was more complex than I thought.
The next few days were a blur of phone calls and emails. I spoke to old suppliers, loyal customers, even longtime competitors. Under the guise of a bored retiree, I gathered piece after piece of information. I learned that the Ethelred Fund was making attractive offers, buying up small companies in the supply chain for more than they were worth. They didn't act like investors, they acted like conquerors. In the midst of this, Michael called and invited me to dinner. A family dinner, he said, just the 3 of us. I knew it was his clumsy attempt to mend fences, or maybe to soothe his conscience. I agreed, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted to look my enemy in the eye and see the blindness of my own son. We met at a fancy restaurant on Michigan Avenue, the kind of place with huge plates and a tiny bit of food in the middle. It was Vanessa's world, all flash and no substance. Michael looked tired, trying to make small talk about the weather, about the Chicago Bears. Vanessa, on the other hand, was radiant in an emerald silk dress, looking like a queen bestowing her attention on her subjects. Mom, Michael said after we ordered, the company is doing fine. I know you're worried, but the financials are strong. Profits are even up slightly this quarter. I put my fork down and looked straight at Vanessa, who was smiling with satisfaction. Profits on paper are easy to create, Michael. You just have to sell off your assets. The hard part is creating lasting value, the kind of thing your father and I spent our lives building. Vanessa's smile faltered for a second before becoming even sweeter. You don't need to worry, Mother. Everything is under my control. I'm leading Albright and Son to a brighter future. I looked at my son, who was nodding in agreement with his wife, his eyes full of admiration. He was lost in the illusion this woman had woven, a fabric that glittered but was rotten from the inside. The dinner ended in awkwardness. I knew I couldn't sway Michael with words. I needed proof, undeniable proof. And so I went to see George Friedman, the company's lawyer for 30 years and a dear family friend. George was a careful man. He didn't believe in promises, only in the words written in a contract. I met him in his old-fashioned office, which smelled of paper and reliability. I told him everything I had discovered. He listened intently, his thin fingers laced together. When I finished, he said nothing, just opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file. I was afraid you might come, Judith, he said, his voice low and weary. As the company lawyer, I couldn't approach you. But since Michael signed power of attorney over to Vanessa, I had to review the documents on the Ethelred Fund. And what I saw has been keeping me up at night. He pushed the file towards me. You were right, but it's worse than you think. Look at this clause. He pointed to a small block of text. It states that in the event Albright and Son fails to meet its profit targets for 2 consecutive quarters, the Ethelred Fund has the priority right to acquire a controlling stake at a predetermined price. A rock bottom price, I whispered, feeling the blood run cold in my veins. Exactly, George confirmed. Their plan is crystal clear, Judith. The Ethelred Fund isn't investing in technology. It's squeezing Albright and Son. By owning the suppliers, it can raise the price of raw materials at any time, causing our production costs to soar and profits to plummet. When we miss our targets, it will swoop in and take over the whole company for pennies on the dollar. It's a perfect trap. I sat there, stunned. Her plan wasn't to build a new empire. It was to steal an old one. And my son was handing her the keys. That night, I didn't call ahead. I drove straight to the company headquarters. It was almost 10 p.m., but the light in Michael's office was still on. I used my old security card, surprised it still worked. Perhaps Vanessa, in her arrogance, didn't think an old woman like me could cause any trouble. Michael was startled when I walked in. He looked exhausted, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I walked right up to his desk and placed George's file on it. "Read it," I said, my voice colder than the November wind outside. He looked at me, then at the file. He reluctantly opened it, skimming a few pages. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. But then he slammed the file shut and pushed it back towards me, an act of defiance. "I don't want to see this," he said, his voice sharp. "This is just you digging for dirt. You can't accept that I'm a grown man, can you? You don't trust me. You don't trust my wife. You just want to control everything, just like you always have." His words were like knives. But I didn't back down. I looked straight into my son's eyes. The same blue as Arthur's, but now clouded by pride and blindness. "I don't want control," I said, my voice softening now, filled with an unconcealed pain. "I believe in what your father and I built. I believe in the truth. Read it carefully, Michael. Don't let love make you blind. The truth doesn't care if you believe it or not. It's still the truth." I turned and left his office, leaving him alone with the papers and the doubt that was tearing him apart. As I walked out of the building, I no longer felt the calm of the hurricane's eye. I was in the heart of the storm itself, and I knew that from this moment on, I wasn't just fighting for a company. I was fighting to save my son, and I wasn't sure if I would be in time. After that fiery confrontation in Michael's office, I knew I had planted a seed of doubt. But a seed needs time to sprout, and I was afraid we didn't have much time. I went home feeling a gnawing helplessness. I had presented the truth, but it had been rejected. Now everything depended on Michael. Would he choose to believe his own eyes or the sweet nothings of his cunning wife? The next few days passed in silence. I didn't call Michael, and he didn't call me. I knew I had to let him fight his own demons. Meanwhile, I continued my work, connecting the final pieces of the puzzle. I discovered that the Ethelred Fund not only had a shady business registration, but one of its listed directors had the last name Croft. A coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences. Meanwhile, the seed I planted had begun to sprout in Michael. It started with small ripples. He started paying closer attention in meetings. He'd hear Vanessa talk about cost efficiency while signing off on a new raw materials contract, but then he'd remember my warning and double-check it himself. He realized the price of synthetic fiber in the new contract was 20% above market value, supplied by one of the very companies the Ethelred Fund had just acquired. Another coincidence. Then one night, long after Vanessa was asleep, he sat alone in his study. The glow of his laptop lit up his troubled face. He remembered his mother's anger, the pain in her eyes. He opened the file from George the lawyer again, this time reading every word, every sentence, not missing a single detail. The trap was laid bare, cold and ruthless.
Driven by a vague fear, he did something he never thought he would. He snuck onto his wife's laptop. Vanessa was a careful person. Everything was password protected. Michael tried her birthday, no luck. Their anniversary, nothing. He was about to give up when he remembered something. In a rare moment of sharing, Vanessa had mentioned the name of her childhood dog, Julian. Michael typed it in. The screen unlocked. He found a folder simply named Project, but inside weren't business plans. It was a treasure trove of betrayal. A chain of emails between Vanessa and someone named Julian Croft. As he read the emails, Michael's world fell apart. Julian Croft was Vanessa's brother. They weren't just discussing the takeover of Albright & Son. They were mocking Michael's naivety.
And then he saw it, the thing that drove the final nail in the coffin of his love. It was a new logo design attached to an email with the subject line, Our Future. The logo was a proud lion, and beneath it were the words, Croft Industries. The betrayal wasn't just about money or a company, it was an erasure. Vanessa had never loved him. She had only used him as a tool, a stepping stone to build her own family's empire on the ashes of his. That night, it was raining in Chicago, a cold, relentless downpour. Near midnight, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Michael standing there, soaked to the bone, his face pale and empty. He wasn't carrying an umbrella. He looked like a lost child. He didn't say a word, just walked inside and handed me his phone, the screen still lit up with those damning emails. I scanned them. My heart ached, not with triumph, but for my son's pain. You were right, he whispered, his voice shattered, about everything. I just stayed quiet, stepped forward, and placed a hand on his trembling shoulder. My silence held all the love, forgiveness, and strength he needed in that moment. What do we do now, son? I asked softly. He lifted his head, and for the first time in months, I saw the man I had raised. The confusion in his eyes was gone, replaced by a steady flame of resolve. I'm calling an emergency shareholder meeting, he said, his voice firm again. I will not let her destroy Dad's legacy. The shareholder meeting took place 2 days later. The cold conference room was now packed, the air thick with tension and curiosity. Vanessa, completely unaware, walked in with her usual confidence. She smiled at the shareholders, thinking this was her stage for one last performance before sealing her deal. She began her presentation, the same flowery words about the future, about profits, about breakthroughs. In the middle of it, Michael stood up. The room went silent. Thank you, Vanessa, he said, his voice ringing out, sharp as steel. A very impressive presentation. But before we vote on this plan, I'd like the shareholders to consider another proposal, the removal of our current CEO. A shocked murmur rippled through the room. The color drained from Vanessa's face. For the first time, I saw her perfect facade crack. She turned to Michael, her eyes blazing with panic and fury. "Michael, what are you talking about?" she hissed. Michael didn't answer her. He turned to me, sitting quietly in the front row reserved for the founding family. "I yield the floor to my mother, Mrs. Judith Albright," he announced formally. All eyes turned to me. I slowly walked up to the podium. I didn't need a slideshow or charts. I just needed the truth. Good morning, I began, my voice calm and clear. Many of you have known me my entire life, and you remember how I ran this company and how I made it grow. I spoke of how Arthur and I started with nothing. I spoke of the employees who had been with us for generations. I spoke of what the name Albright & Son truly meant. Then I moved to the present. I didn't use harsh words. I simply presented the facts, logically and irrefutably. And this, I said, is the future our CEO has planned for us. Michael clicked the remote. The large screen behind me switched from profit charts to images of the emails of the Croft Industries logo design. The room erupted in gasps. I saw Vanessa's face turn white as a sheet. She tried to fight back. "This is slander. This is a conspiracy. You two are plotting against me." But it was too late. No one believed her anymore. The truth, once revealed, has a power all its own. "That's enough, Vanessa. Isn't this proof enough?" Michael said, his voice like ice. "The board will now vote." The outcome was already decided. A few months later, I walked into Michael's office. It had been redecorated, still modern, but warmer. On his desk, next to the latest tablet, was his father's marble paperweight. I brought in 2 cups of coffee, just like I used to do for Arthur. "I'm looking into reopening the North Carolina mill," he said, his eyes fixed on a design on his screen. "But not to weave the old way. We're going to integrate new technology, smart fibers, into traditional patterns, a blend of the past and the future." I smiled, a truly peaceful smile. Your father would have loved that idea. We stood together by the window, looking down at the factory yard, where trucks full of fabric were bustling in and out. The company had weathered the storm. So had my family. A story never really ends, I thought to myself. It just turns to a new chapter. Michael had finally found his own story, not by erasing the past, but by learning from it to build the future. And I, this old storyteller, could finally put down my pen, content with the story I'd written.